Section 21 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 21. Manners and Customs of South Sea Islanders, Part 3. Having thus described their manner of making the cloth, I shall proceed to their method of dyeing it. They have principally two colors in which they excel, red and yellow. The first of these is most beautiful. I might almost venture to say a more delicate color than any we have in Europe, approaching however nearest to scarlet. The second is a good bright color, but of no particular excellence. They also upon some occasions dye brown and black, but so seldom that I had not the opportunity during my stay to see the methods or learn the materials which they make use of. I shall therefore say no more of these colors, than that they were so indifferent in their qualities, that they did not much raise my curiosity to inquire concerning them. To begin then with the red, in favour of which I shall premise that I believe no voyager has passed these seas but he has said something in praise of this colour, the brightness and elegance of which is so great that it cannot avoid being taken notice of by the slightest observer. This colour is made by the admixture of the juices of two vegetables, neither of which in their separate state have the least tendency to the colour of red, nor have any parts of them that I have at least been able to observe any circumstance relating to them, from whence anyone should be led to conclude that the colour of red was at all latent in them. They are Ficus tinctoria, which is called by them mate, the same name as the colour, and Cordia sebestina orientalis called itu. Of these, the fruits of the first and the leaves of the second are used in the following manner. The fruits, which are about as large as a rounceable pea, or very small gooseberry, produce upon breaking off the stalk, close to them each one drop of a milky liquid, resembling the juice of a fig tree in Europe, for indeed the tree itself is a kind of wild fig tree. This liquor the women collect, breaking off the footstalk and shaking the drop, which hangs, to the little fig, into a small quantity of coconut water. To sufficiently prepare a gill of coconut water will require 3 or 4 quarts of the little figs, though I never could observe that they had any rule in proportioning the quantity, except observing the coconut water, which was to be of a whey colour when a sufficient quantity of the juice of the little figs was mixed among it. When this liquor is prepared, the leaves of the itu are brought, which are well wetted in it. They are then laid upon a plantain leaf, and the women begin first gently to turn and shake them about. Afterwards, as they grow more and more flaccid by this operation, to squeeze them a little, increasing the pressure gradually, all which is done merely to prevent the leaves from breaking. Still, as they become more flaccid and spongy, they supply them with more of the juice. In about 5 minutes the colour begins to appear on the veins of the leaves of the itu, and in 10 or a little more all is finished and ready for straining, at which time they press and squeeze the leaves as hard as they possibly can. The method of straining is this. They have for the purpose a large quantity of the fibres of a kind of cyperus grass, Cyperus dubius, called by them mo'o, which the boys prepare very nimbly by drawing the sticks of it through their teeth, or between 2 little sticks, until all the green bark and the brandy substance which lays between them is gone. In a covering of these fibres, then, they envelop the leaves, and squeezing or wringing them strongly, express the dye, which turns out very little more in quantity than the liquor employed. This operation they repeat several times, soaking as often the leaves in the dye, and squeezing them dry again, until they have sufficiently extracted all their virtue, when they throw away the remaining leaves, keeping however the mo'o, which serves them instead of a brush to lay the colour upon the cloth. The receptacle used for the liquid dye is constantly a plantain leaf. Whether from any property it may have agreeable to the colour, or the great ease with which they are always got, and the facility of dividing one and making of it many small cups, in which the dye may be distributed to everyone in company, I do not know. Their method of laying it on the cloth is this. They take it up in the fibres of the mo'o, and rubbing that gently over the cloth, spread the outside of it with a thin coat of dye. This is of the thick cloth. The thin they seldom dye more than the edges of. Some indeed I have seen dyed through, as if it had been soaked in the dye, but had not near so elegant a colour as that on which a thin coat only was laid on the outside. Though the itu leaf is the most generally used, and I believe produces the finest colour, yet there are several more which being mixed with the juice of the little figs, produces a red colour, as Tournefortia sericea, which they call tehinu, Convolvulus brasiliensis, Pohui the urhe, Solanum latifolium, Iboa. From the use of these different plants, or from different proportions of materials, many varieties of the colour are observable among their cloths, some of which are very conspicuously superior to others. When the women have been employed in dyeing cloth, they industriously preserve the colour upon their fingers and nails, upon which it shows with its greatest beauty. They look upon this as no small ornament, and I have been sometimes inclined to believe that they even borrow the dye of each other, merely for the purpose of dyeing their fingers. Whether it is esteemed as a beauty, a mark of their huswifery in being able to dye, or their riches in having cloth to dye, I do not know. Of what use this preparation may be to my countrymen, either in itself or in any hints which may be drawn from an admixture of vegetable substances, so totally different from anything of the kind that is practised in Europe, I am not enough versed in chemistry to be able to guess. I must, however, hope that it will be of some. The latent qualities of vegetables have already furnished our most valuable dyes. No one, from an inspection of the plants, could guess that any colour was hid under the herbs of indigo, woad, dyer's weed, or indeed the most of the plants whose leaves are used in dyeing. And yet those latent qualifications have, when discovered, produced colours without which our dyers could hardly go on with their trades. The painter whom I have with me tells me that the nearest imitation of the colour that he could make would be by mixing together vermilion and carmine, but even that would not equal the delicacy of it, though a body colour, and the Indian only a stain in the way that the Indians use it. I cannot say much for its standing. They commonly keep their cloth white till the very time when it is to be used, and then dye it, as if conscious that it would soon fade. I have, however, used cloth dyed with it myself for over a fortnight or 3 weeks, in which time it has very little altered itself, and by that time the cloth was pretty well wore. Of it I also have some now in chests, which a month ago, when I looked into them, had very little altered their colour. The admixture of fixing drugs would, however, certainly not a little conduce to its standing. So much for their red. Their yellow, though a good colour, has certainly no particular excellence to recommend it, in which it is superior to our known yellows. It is made of the bark of the root of a shrub called by them nono, Morinda umbellata. This they scrape into water, and after it is soaked there for a sufficient time, strain the water and dip the cloth into it. The wood of the root is no doubt furnished in some degree with the same property as the bark, but not having any vessels in which they can boil it, it is useless to the inhabitants. The genus of Morinda seems worthy of being examined as to its properties in dyeing. Brown, in his History of Jamaica, mentions 3 species whose roots, he says, are used to dye a brown colour, and Rumphius says of his Bacchus angustifolia, which is very nearly allied to our nono, that it is used by the inhabitants of the East Indian Islands as a fixing drug for the colour of red, with which he says it particularly agrees. They also dye yellow with the fruits of a tree called by them tamanu, Calophyllum inophilium, but their method I never had the fortune to see. It seems, however, to be chiefly esteemed by them for the smell which it gives to the cloth, a smell that is more agreeable to an Indian than a European nose. Besides their cloth, the women make several kinds of matting, which serves them to sleep upon, and the finest for cloths. With the last they take much pains, especially with that sort which is made of the bark of the tree called by them puro, Hibiscus tiliaceus, of which I have seen matting almost as fine as coarse cloth, but the most beautiful sort, called by them vane, which is white and extremely glossy and shiny, is made of the leaves of a sort of pandanus called by them fara, of which we had not the opportunity of seeing either flowers or fruit. The rest of their moyas, as they call them, which serve to sit down or sleep upon, are made of a variety of sorts of rushes, grass, etc. These are extremely nimble in making, and indeed everything which is plaited, baskets of 1,000 different patterns, some very neat, etc. As for occasional baskets or paniers made of coconut leaf, or the little bonnets, which they wear to shade their eyes from the sun of the same material, everyone knows how to make them at once. As soon as the sun was pretty high, the women, who had been with us since morning, sent generally out for coconut leaves, of which they made such bonnets in a few minutes, which they threw away as soon as the sun became again low in the afternoon. These, however, serve merely for a shade, Coverings to their heads they have none, except their hair for these bonnets, or shades only fit around their heads, not upon them. Besides these things, they make nets for fishing in the same manner as we do. Ropes of about an inch, and lines of the poro, threads with which they sew together their canoes, and also belts of the fibres of the coconut, plaited either round or flat very neatly. All their twisting work they do upon their thighs in a manner very difficult to describe, and indeed unnecessary, as no European can want to learn how to do an operation which his instruments will do for him so much faster than it possibly can be done by hand. But of all the strings that they make, none are so excellent as the fishing lines, etc., which are made of the bark of that kind of frutescent nettle called by them eroa, Urtica argentea, which grows in the mountains and is consequently rather scarce. Of this they make the lines which are employed to take the briskest and most active fish, as bonitos, albacores, etc. As I have never made experiments with it, I can only ascertain its strength by saying that it was infinitely stronger than silk lines, which I had on board, made by the best fishing shops in London, though not so thick by almost half. In every expedient for taking fish, they are vastly ingenious. Their seines, nets for fish to mesh themselves in, etc., are exactly like ours. They strike fish with harpoons made of cane and pointed with hard wood, in a more dexterous manner than we do with ours that are headed with iron. For we who fasten lines to ours need only lodge them in the fish to secure it, while they, on the other hand, throwing theirs quite from them, must either mortally wound the fish or loose them. Their hooks, indeed, as they are not made of iron, must be very different from ours in construction. They are of two sorts. First, that called by them witty, which are used for towing, of which figure 1 is the profile, and figure 2 the view of the bottom part. The shank, A, is made of mother of pearl, the most glossy that can be got, the inside, or naturally bright side of which, is put uppermost, as in figure 2. B is a tuft of white dog's or hog's hair, which serves maybe to imitate the tail of a fish. These hooks require no bait. They are used with a fishing rod of bamboo. The people who go out with them have found by the flights of birds which constantly attend shoals of bonitos where they are, paddle their canoes as swift as they can across them, and seldom fail to take some. This Indian invention seems far to exceed anything of the kind which I have seen among Europeans, and is certainly more successful than any artificial flying fish or other thing which is generally used for the taking of bonitos. So far, it deserves imitation at any time when the taking of bonitos is at all desirable. The other sorts of hooks which they have are made likewise of mother of pearl, or some hard shell, and as they cannot make them bearded as our hooks, they supply that fault by making the points turn much inwards, as in the annexed figure. They have them of all sizes, and catch with them all kinds of fish very successfully, I believe. The manner of making them is very simple. Every fisherman makes them for himself. The shell is first cut by the edge of another shell into square pieces. These are formed with files of coral, which work in a manner surprising to anyone who does not know how sharp corals are. A hole is then bored in the middle by a drill, which is no more than any stone that may have a sharp corner in it, tied to the handle of cane, which is turned in the hand like a chocolate mill until the hole is made. The file then comes into the hole and completes the hook, which is done in such a one as the figure shows, in less than a quarter of an hour. In their carpenters', joiners', and stone cutters' work, etc., they are almost as little obliged to the use of tools as in making these hooks. An axe of stone in the shape of an adze, a chisel or gouge made of a human bone, a file or rasp of coral, skin of stingrays, and coral sand to polish with, are a sufficient set of tools for building a house and furnishing it with boats, as well as for quarrying and squaring stones for the pavement of anything which may require it in the neighbourhood. Their stone axes are made of a black stone, not very hard, but tolerably tough. They are of different sizes. Some that are intended for felling weigh 3 or 4 pounds. Others which are used only for carving, not so many ounces. Whatever these tools want in goodness is made up by the industry of the people who use them. Felling a tree is their greatest labour. A large one requires many hands to assist, and some days before it can be finished. But when once it is down, they manage it with far greater dexterity than is credible to a European. If it is to be made into boards, they put wedges into it and drive them with such dexterity, as they have told me, for I never saw it, that they divide it into slabs of 3 or 4 inches in thickness, seldom meeting with an accident if the tree is good. These slabs they very soon dub down with their axes to any given thinness. In this work they certainly excel. Indeed, their tools are better adapted for it than any other purpose. I have seen them dub off the rough first coat of a plank at least as fast as one of our carpenters could have done it. And in hollowing, where they have liberty to raise large floors of the wood, they certainly work quicker, owing to the weight of their tools. Those who are masters of this business will make of a surprising thin coat from a whole plank without missing a stroke. They can also work upon a piece of wood of any shape, as well as they can upon a flat one, for in making their canoes every piece is formed first into its proper shape, bilging or flat, for as they never bend a plank, all the bilging pieces must be shaped by hand, which is done entirely with axes. They have small axes for carving also, but their carved work was so bad and in so very mean a taste that it scarce deserved that name. Yet they love much to have carved work and figures stuck about their canoes, the great ones especially, which generally have a figure of a man at the head and another at the stern of them. Their morais also are ornamented with different kinds of figures, one sort of which represent many men standing on each other's heads. They also have the figures of animals, and planks whose faces are carved in patterns of squares and circles, etc. But every part of their carving is in an equally bad taste. All their work, however, acquires a certain neatness in the finishing, for they polish everything, even the side of a canoe or a post of a house, with coral sand rubbed on in the outer husk of a coconut and raisin skin, which makes them very smooth and neat. Their boats, at least all that I have seen of them, may be divided into 2 general classes. The first, which are called by the natives aivaha, are the only sort which are used at Tahiti. They serve for fishing and for short trips to sea, but do not at all seem calculated for long ones. The others again, which are called pahe, and are used by the inhabitants of the Society's islands, viz. Olhiatia, Bolabola, Huaheine, etc., are rather too clumsy for fishing, for which reason the inhabitants of those isles also have aivahas, but are much better adapted for long voyages than the others. The figure below gives a section of both kinds, of which figure 1 is the aivaha, and figure 2 the pahe. To begin then with the aivaha. These boats differ very much in length. I have measured them from 10 feet to 72, but by no means proportionately in breadth, for that of 10 feet was about 1 in breadth, and that of 72 scarce 2. Nor is their height increased in a much greater proportion. They may be subdivided into 3 sorts, the fighting aivaha, the common sailing or fishing aivaha, and the travelling aivaha. The fighting aivaha is by far the largest. The head and stern of these boats are considerably raised above the body of them, in a semicircular form, the latter especially, which is 17 or 18 feet in height, when the body of the boat is scarcely 3. These boats never go to sea singly. 2 are always fastened together side by side, at a distance of about 2 feet, by strong poles of wood which go across them, and upon them is built a stage in the forepart, about 10 or 12 feet long, and a little broader than the 2 boats. This is supported by pillars about 6 feet high, and upon it stand the people who fight with slings, spears, etc. Below are the rowers, who are much less engaged in the battle on account of their confined situation, but who receive the wounded from the stage and furnish fresh men to ascend in their room. This much from description, for I never saw any of their battles. The sailing and fishing aivas vary in size, from about 40 feet in length to the smallest I have mentioned, but those which are under 25 feet in length seldom or never carry sail. Their sterns only are raised, and those not above 4 or 5 feet. Their heads are quite flat, and have a flat board projecting forwards beyond them about 4 feet. Those which I have called travelling aivas differ from these in nothing, but their being constantly joined 2 and 2 together in the same manner as the fighting ones, and having a small neat house 5 or 6 feet broad, and 7 or 8 long fastened upon the forepart of them, in which the principal people, who use them very much, set when they are carried from place to place. The sailing aivas have also sometimes this house upon them, when they are joined 2 and 2 together, which is seldom, however. Indeed, the difference between these 2 consists almost entirely in the rigging, and I have divided them into 2 more because they are generally seen employed in very different occupations. than from any real difference in their build. All Ivas, however, agree in that they are built wall-sided and with flat bottoms, in which they differ from the pahe, figure 2, whose sides are built rounded out, or bilging, as it is called, and her bottom sharp, which answers in some measure instead of a keel. These pahes differ very much in size. I have seen them from 60 to 30 feet in length, but like the Ivas, they are very narrow in proportion to their length. One that I measured was 51 feet in length, in breadth at the top only 1 1/2 feet, and in the bilge 3 feet, which is about the general proportion. Their round sides, however, make them capable of carrying much greater burthens, and being much more safe sea-boats, in consequence of which they are used merely for fighting and making long voyages. For the purposes of fishing and travelling along shore, the natives of the islands where these are chiefly used have Ivas. The fighting pahes, which are the largest, are fitted in the same manner as the fighting Ivas, only as they carry far greater burthens the stages are proportionately larger. The sailing ones are most generally fastened 2 and 2 together. For this purpose the middling-sized ones are said to be the best and least liable to accidents in stormy weather. In these, if we may credit the reports of the inhabitants, they make very long voyages, often remaining out from home several months, visiting in that time many different islands, of which they repeated to us the names of near 100. They cannot, however, remain at sea above a fortnight or 20 days, though they live as sparingly as possible, for want of proper provisions and places to put them in safe, as well as water, of which, however, they carry a tolerable stock in hollow bamboos. All these embarkations, which indeed are all that I saw used in any of the islands, are disproportionately narrow in respect to their length, which causes them to be so very easily overset, that not even the Indians dare venture in them till they are fitted with a contrivance to prevent this inconvenience, which is done either by fastening 2 together side by side, as has been before described, in which case one supports the other, and they become the most steady vehicle that can be imagined, or if one of them is to go out single, a log of wood fastened to 2 poles, which are tied across the boat, serves to balance it tolerably, though not so securely but that I have seen the Indians overset them very often. This is upon the same principles as that used in the flying proa of the Ladrone Isles, described in Lord Anson's Voyage, where it is called an outrigger. Indeed, the vessels themselves enough resemble the flying proa to make it appear at least possible that either that is a very artful improvement of these, or these a very awkward imitation of that. These boats are paddled along with large paddles, which have a long handle and a flat blade, resembling more than anything I recollect a baker's peel. Of these generally every one in the boat has one except those who sit under the houses, and with these they push themselves on pretty fast through the water. They are so leaky, however, that one person at least is employed almost constantly in throwing out the water. The only thing in which they excel is landing in a surf, for by reason of their great length and high sterns, they would land dry in a surf when our boats could scarcely land at all, and in the same manner put off from the shore, as I have often experienced. When fitted for sailing, they have either 1 or 2 masts fitted to a frame, which is above the canoe. They are made of a single stick. In one that I measured of 32 feet in length, the mast was 25 feet high, which seems to me about the common proportion. To this is fastened a sail of about 1/3 longer, but narrow, of a triangular shape, pointed at the top, and the outside curved. It is bordered all round with a frame of wood, and has no contrivance either for reefing or furling, so that in case of bad weather it must be entirely cut away. But I fancy in these moderate climates they are seldom brought to this necessity. The material of which it is made is universally matting. With these sails their canoes go at a very good rate, and lay very near the wind, probably on account of their sail being bordered with wood, which makes them stand better than any bowlines could possibly do. On the top of this sail they carry an ornament, which in taste resembles much our pennants. It is made of feathers and reaches down to the very water, so that when blown out by the wind it makes no inconsiderable show. They are indeed fond of ornaments in all parts of their boats. They commonly, in the good ones, have a figure at the stern, and the pahes, which rise rounding both at the head and stern, they have a figure at both, and the smaller Ivahas have commonly a small carved pillar standing upon their stern. Considering these people are entirely destitute of iron, they build these canoes very well. Of the Ivahas, the foundation is always the trunks of 1 or more trees hollowed out. The ends of these are sloped off and sewed together with the fibres of the husk of the coconut. The sides of them are then raised with plank, sewed together in the same manner. The pajes, as they are much better embarkations, so they are built in a much more ingenious manner. Like the others, they are laid upon a long keel, which, however, is not above 4 or 5 inches deep. Upon this they raise with 2 ranges of plank, each of which is about 18 inches high and about 4 feet in length. Such a number of pieces must necessarily be framed and fitted together before they are sewed, and this they do very dexterously, supporting the keel by ropes made fast to the top of the house, under which they work, and then each plank by a stanchion, so that the canoe is completely put together before any one part of her is fastened to that which is next to it, and in this manner supported till the sewing is completed. This, however, soon rots in the salt water. It must be renewed once a year at least, in doing which the canoe is entirely taken to pieces and every plank examined, by which means they are always in good repair. The best of them are, however, very leaky, for as they use no caulking, the water must run in at every hole through which the sewing is passed. This, however, is no great inconvenience to them who live in a climate where the water is always warm and go barefoot. For the convenience of keeping these pajes dry, we saw in the islands where they are used peculiar sort of houses, which were built on purpose for their reception, and put to no use but that. They are built of poles stuck upright in the ground and tied together at the top, so that they make a kind of Gothic arch. The sides of these are completely covered with thatch down to the ground, but the ends are left open. One of these I measured 50 paces in length, 10 in breadth, and 24 feet high, and this was of the middling size. End of section 21.